Hi, everyone. We would like to welcome you to a short series of interviews with a variety of guests that are joining us during Recovery Month and Day to celebrate recovery and highlight that recovery is possible. Besides being a celebration, Recovery Month also showcases that recovery is a pathway that one cannot walk alone. Even though recovery works in parts through individual efforts, the soil and structural environments are essential. Therefore, we should put efforts in creating the right environment to recover by reducing stigma and allowing a person in recovery to grow in their own pace. Before on to the interviews, I would briefly like to introduce ourselves. My name is Cressida and I'm representing the World Federation Against Drugs, which is a multilateral community with almost 370 non-governmental organizations and over 500 individuals from 64 countries. Our members represent all regions of the world. Our common aim is to strengthen prevention, increase access to treatment, and promote recovery. And we believe that only together we can work towards reaching this goal on a global level with a gender and child-sensitive perspective. My dear colleague Mulka is representing our WFAD Gender Working Group, and I would like to hand the word over to her to introduce herself and the working group.
My name is Mulka Nisik, and as Cressida said, I'm today on behalf of the Gender Working Group, which was created within the WFAD to specifically address the drug use and addiction among women, gender-based violence, and also its correlations with the healthcare, treatment, and recovery. And it's our honor and pleasure to have our first guest speaker in our Recovery Month series. And it's Professor David Best, and I will hand over to you, David, for now to introduce yourself.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Mulka and Cressida, and thank you for that welcome. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I am a long-established researcher in the addictions field, and I guess for me, I'm not going to go through jobs and job titles. I mainly work at Leeds Trinity University, where I'm in the process of trying to set up a Centre for Addiction Recovery Research, which will specifically focus on this. And about 150 years ago, I became an addiction researcher, and I started doing all those things that researchers did at that time, which was I did some randomized controlled trials and randomized clinical trials in therapeutic and treatment settings in South London, where I was based at the Institute of Psychiatry. And the first big, I guess, transition in my career was about 15 years ago, where I started becoming less interested in the problems of addiction and, if you like, technical solutions, talking therapies, pharmacotherapies, and I became much more interested in what enabled people to recover. And at that time, the focus was much more on mutual aid groups. And really, there was a big focus on 12-step and on smart recovery and other primarily anonymous peer-based recovery organizations. And that has changed. So that was the first thing. And it really was a bewildering transition for me from that very pessimistic harm symptom management model to something much more optimistic. And then the second big transition for me was I got very frustrated about people criticizing recovery models on the grounds of their vagueness. This is too much wishful thinking, it's all subjective, it's all personal. And really, I became interested in the idea of recovery capital, primarily as a way of trying to say, well, can we hone our understanding? But what it did, and it took me a while to realize that what it did was, it gave us a metric and a measurement system. It allowed us to test hypotheses, to count and quantify, and to have, if you like, a currency for recovery that we could track and chart progress. And this is crucially important because it now allows us to say, yes, of course, there's subjective personal elements, but we have a way of mapping those common, testable, hypothesizable components of recovery.
Yeah, that's indeed great. And as you said, recovery capital is so important. But what exactly is it? Like, what is recovery capital? What is it including? And why, as you already explained, it is quite important in the recovery field to kind of make it people grasp what it is. But what is it cultivating about it as well? So
okay, let me start. I'll see if I can remember as close as possible the Granfield and Cloud definition. So the original definition comes from two American academics, Robert Granfield and William Cloud, who defined recovery capital as the strength and breadth of internal and external resources available to an individual to support their recovery journey. Now, I haven't got that quite right, but not far away. But in essence, what I think is really important about this is the idea of it transitions from a deficits model to a strengths model. That's the first key thing about recovery capital. And it's an attempt to quantify the dynamic process of those things that are part of the resources that are available to somebody. And it's really important. So it's not stuff in your body or your head. It includes, for me, not only those personal qualities, but social networks and relationships that you have. And then critically, the third element is access to resources in the community. Now, different academics have come up with different taxonomies and different systems for measuring what recovery capital is. But broadly, there's those three things. There's the stuff about you, those traditional resilience strength factors. There's the things about the people you're with, and they can be positive or negative as well. So they can include things like if you've got a using network, then that's massively negative social recovery capital. And then beyond your immediate network of people you know, there are all of those systems and structural things, access to not only to recovery champions and visible recovery communities, but also to basic things like decent housing, to access to training courses, jobs, education. All of those things really matter. And I know this is a gender-based thing. So that the corollary for collective or community recovery capital is negative recovery community capital, which includes things like stigma. And one of the interesting challenges for women is, particularly for women who are mothers, the additional stigma associated with. And what's interesting about stigma is it operates at all three levels. So at a personal level, self-stigma is the internalization and the, if you like, the disempowerment caused by the internalization of stigma. Social negative social recovery capital around stigma would be about the exclusion and demonization of the groups you belong to. And then negative community recovery capital as stigma would be about we don't offer treatments to drug users. We don't offer treatments to drinkers because they are seen as lesser or excluded or marginalized. And all those things about social distance, we wouldn't give them jobs. So to go back, so why do we need to cultivate it? And cultivating for me is a really important term because the cultivation here is not something where we say, Cressida, it's your problem, your fault, you get on with fixing it. It seems to me like as a group or a community, your attempt to recover is a collective process, but it's also a collective process that the very fact of doing it generates residual recovery capital. And this I shamelessly steal from my own kind of academic mentor, John Braithwaite, who would say, look, you know, social capital, human capital, recovery capital, they're not like financial capital because the more of it you use, the more of it you generate. And there is a residual effect. There's a residual benefit. And one of the things I think that we're still early in the science of is when we cultivate recovery capital, it should benefit you as the individual on a journey, but it should also benefit the group and the community in which it occurs. It has that kind of positive ripple effect, but it's bi-directional and it goes both ways. Negative media stories, acts of exclusion, all of these things diminish recovery capital, not just at an individual level, but at a group level and a community level. So, you know, there's this constant tension, this constant movement that we want to cultivate. And one of the things that anyone who researches in the recovery field will know, the evidence base remains weak, much better than it was, but it remains weak. And one of our big challenges is to start to say, okay, how do we start to evidence that growth at the personal level? And I know for your interest that one of the things we're increasingly aware of, we can't assume that the recovery journeys of men and women are the same. We can't assume that recovery journeys are the same across locations. There's much more of a specificity. And cultivating for me is partly almost like gathering the crop of new innovations, new successes. And to this extent, I would regard my role as kind of equivalent, though nowhere near the standard of William White's role, almost gathering those stories and successes and attempting to promote and promulgate them. And that's really what the website is about.
That's great. I'm really happy you mentioned also the negative recovery capital and what media, and not only social media and real media, but also websites have in this. And the aim of these interviews is actually to promote the websites that spread hope, recovery, evidence, and innovation from around the world. And we really want you to highlight the recovery capital as you just did. So our next question would be, what's the website about, some background on it, and what do you vision for the future moving forward?
Yeah, so look, for me, this is something I've long wanted to do. I kind of feel that at the moment, there are really only two places where you can go to gather information about recovery evidence and recovery models, and they are William White's fabulous website, williamwhitepapers.com, and the Recovery Research Institute led by John Kelly at Harvard. But inevitably, they are both very US focused. They're very US centric. And they tend, especially John Kelly's website, it tends to be quite a high standard of evidence. So it's things that are published in high status academic journals. And for me, I wanted something that links much more closely to the work of the College of Lived Experience Recovery organization, much more ground level, to talk about things like that are just new and innovative and I think are really exciting. And I want to try and do it to build up this repertoire, because I've been in this very fortunate position for years now of being witness to all kinds of exciting innovations, you know, that aren't just in where I live in England, but also that exist in Scotland, in Ireland, in Wales, across Europe, across America. So Jessica and I were in Michigan about a month ago, and we visited several fabulous recovery initiatives there. And there's, you know, the problem is that people consistently in our field reinvent square wheels. And I want to start being able to say, here's a place where you can go, not to try and find some kind of Cochrane level evidence about effectiveness, but you can look at things that I think of as genuinely innovative, creative, and new. Because I think one of the interesting challenges for us is, and I used this example earlier on today, that if you come up with a model for an incredibly successful inpatient detox ward, you would basically take the blueprint and you'd copy it and you'd reproduce it in 100 different places, and you'd make a lot of money and everybody would detox well, because it's a process and a procedure. But recovery capital isn't like that. And each success you have will be a unique coming together of an individual within a particular group, set in a particular set of resources and assets and contexts. So I am in no way trying to say, here are models people should use, but ideas they can maybe build on and capitalize on and learn from. Not everywhere needs a recovery cafe.
Yes, definitely.
No, you're definitely right. And I think having an idea of how things can be and what is important for recovery already guides a lot of people into a certain direction. So it kind of is a guideline rather than a model that everyone has to follow directly. So I think that's great. And it's good to have this website as well, as you said, to not only have an American focus, but also more of a variety of things that people can connect with. So that, which would actually lead to the next question. So how can people connect? Like, is there any additional social media? Is there a newsletter available or anything that with this website that people can connect with?
It's still in its very early days. So, but what I have done, and one of the things that I'm trying to create is a kind of three-part model of my work. So there's the center in Leeds, which I hope will be a center for research and teaching. There is the Recovery Outcomes Institute work here in Florida, that my fiance Jessica and myself run, which is about developing recovery capital measurement methods. And then the third part, which is on the website, is to try and create community laboratories. And the community laboratory idea is basically so that people who are interested, who run services, who have innovations, can contact us through the website, and we can develop new partnerships. So I think this Thursday, I've we have meetings with people who run recovery high schools about how to measure and develop recovery capital there, with the peer-based recovery center of excellence in the US about it. And you know, the idea is just to try and create this forum. So at the moment, the website doesn't really have much more than some blogs by me on it, but the aim ultimately will be to include some podcasts, some videos, some academic papers. You know, I want it to become a kind of resource for innovation around recovery. And it's early days, so I wouldn't want anyone to go there expecting it to be a kind of treasure trove at the moment. But it will gather over time, and I'd encourage anyone who is interested to please do get in touch with me. My technical capabilities are extremely limited, so I'm only slowly working out what some of the options and the possibilities are. There's a lot of blogs. I'm not sure I'll do newsletters separate from the blogs, but there will be a lot of blogs that provide information and updates. And I will start adding other sections as I move forward with this.
That's great, David. We're so happy that you started this initiative, and it's really important for everybody working in the field of addiction and recovery, I think. And we will definitely make sure that our members around the world have the link and see what the website is about. So can you please also have some short message for our members for the Recovery Month?
So, look, this is such an important time. We talked about stigma earlier. Recovery Month is such an important celebration of achievement and goals. And if anyone has anything they think that has a significant contribution to recovery capital at any of those levels, including challenge and stigma, please do get in touch with me. I would be really interested to talk to them, to write about it on the website. And really what I'm trying to do is to harvest this global knowledge, not about things that might, because I know they're happening. And one of the things that is both a source of amazement to me and to some extent a source of frustration is every time I visit a new city or a new center or a new site, something new and exciting is going on and nobody knows about it. Yes. And I think that the huge challenge that I've given myself is I want to create a central hub where I can create almost a directory or a tapestry of those innovations. And that's really what Cultivating Recovery Capital is about.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And we're really looking forward to the next blogs and to spreading your website around the world.